It all started on what should have been a normal day at the Intergalactic Council Station. The station floated above a distant star system, shining like a silver jewel in the darkness of space. It was enormous, designed to be a place of peace, diplomacy, and discussion, where representatives from hundreds of species across the galaxy came together to solve conflicts and make laws. It was a place that was supposed to symbolize hope and unity. On this day, humans were part of the delegation. Humans had been accepted into the council not long ago, and their presence was still a point of interest, curiosity, and for some suspicion. Among the human delegation was a young girl. She wasn't there as a diplomat or a soldier. She was there because of her parent, one of Earth's top representatives in the council. She had a gentle curiosity and a way of smiling that could make even the most serious council member pause. She loved asking questions about alien technology, about planets she had only seen on holoscreens, and about species she had never met. She had a natural kindness, a kind of innocence that reminded everyone around her of why humans, despite being new to the galactic scene, had earned respect and trust. No one expected the day to turn dark. The council chamber was crowded. Delegates from multiple species were discussing trade routes, energy sharing, and peace agreements. The human representatives were quietly listening, trying to make their case about planetary security and trade fairness. Then a misunderstanding happened, small, almost trivial. One of the council's security officers accused a human delegate of breaking a minor protocol. Voices rose. Arguments became louder. The air seemed to tighten with tension. The young girl, curious as always, moved closer to see what was happening. She didn't understand the seriousness of the argument, but she could sense the anger in the room. She looked around, hoping to see someone calm the situation, someone to remind the adults that this was not a place for violence. But the situation exploded faster than anyone could react. The security officer, large and heavily armored, shoved the human delegate in frustration. The girl tried to step back, but she was too close. The officer, in a split second, struck out, a careless movement, a single blow. In that moment, everything froze. The girl fell to the ground. There was a collective gasp across the chamber. Cameras recorded it all. Holoscreens caught every second. Her eyes, wide with shock, met her parents' eyes for the briefest instant. And then, just like that, she was gone. The council security officer did not hesitate. He raised his hands, claiming it was an accident. Many delegates nodded, pretending to accept the explanation. Some even looked away, unwilling to see what had just happened. Others whispered that humans were fragile and too emotional, that they overreacted to even small conflicts. The council called it a mistake, an unfortunate accident. But the cameras and witnesses told a different story. On Earth, the news spread like fire across the solar system. Families gathered around screens. And for the first time in decades, humans were silent. There were no protests, no angry statements. The global networks went quiet. Every colony, every city, every station paused. There was a feeling in the air, heavy and tense, that something was coming. People didn't need to speak. They all understood. Humans did not forgive easily, and they never forgot. The world watched, and the galaxy watched. Billions of beings had witnessed the death of the young girl and the cold indifference of the council. Many assumed that humans would respond in the usual way, sending formal complaints, requesting a meeting, maybe issuing sanctions. But humans were not like that. Humans had evolved over centuries to survive, to think ahead, and to act decisively. When their people were harmed, for hours Earth did nothing visible. But behind the silence, preparations were underway. Command centers buzzed with activity. War fleets moved in secret across the solar system, satellites and sensors activated. Scientists and engineers worked day and night, not on new weapons, but on strategies, defensive systems, and communications that the galaxy could not intercept. Meanwhile, news feeds across other star systems were full of speculation. Some species thought humans were bluffing, that the death of a single child could not provoke such a massive response. Others, those who had studied Earth's history, began to worry. They remembered stories from centuries ago when humans had faced extinction-level threats and survived. The calm silence of humanity in the face of loss was never a sign of weakness. It was the quiet before a storm that had no equal. Back at the council station, the mood was tense. Delegates whispered among themselves, trying to guess what Earth would do. Messages were sent, but none were answered. Attempts to communicate with human envoys returned nothing. Even the most patient council leaders felt a hint of fear. They knew deep down that the humans were not reacting because they were weak. They were reacting because they were planning something that no one could yet imagine. The young girl's death became more than a tragedy. It became a symbol. Across human colonies, her image was quietly displayed in homes, offices, and command centers. It reminded everyone that even in a vast galaxy, every life mattered and every injustice demanded acknowledgement. People who had never met her felt her loss as if it were their own. They felt the anger of humanity rise, not as chaos, but as determination. As the sun set over Earth and its colonies, a message began to form, not in words, but in action. Ships were quietly moving into position. Communication satellites encrypted messages that the galaxy could not decode. Military units were placed in readiness, not for war against each other, but for a purpose that would shake the very foundations of the Council. And yet, through all of this, humanity remained calm. People continued their daily lives, went to work, and cared for their families. There were no riots, no public displays of rage. The galaxy could see nothing. But behind the quiet faces and normal routines, humans were preparing for something they had never done before. A response that was precise, decisive, and terrifying in its inevitability. In those hours, billions across the stars began to understand a simple truth. Humans may seem small, fragile, and new in the grand scheme of the galaxy, but they had one thing that no other species could claim: an unbreakable will to protect their own. The death of a child, someone so innocent and full of life, was not just a personal loss. It was a declaration. The galaxy had learned that there was a line humans would never let anyone cross. By the time night fell over Earth, the first seeds of retaliation had already been planted. Engineers were finalizing strategies. Captains were running simulations. And humans who had trained their entire lives for situations like this stood ready. They were not angry in a loud, shouting way. Their anger was cold, focused, and unstoppable. And somewhere in the galaxy, the Council had no idea what was coming. They believed that humans would ask for justice in their way, through words, not actions. They thought humanity's response would be measured, predictable, and controllable. But humans were never predictable when it came to protecting their own. The young girl's death was a tragedy that should have stayed confined to one room, one moment in time. But it became something much larger. It became the spark that would ignite a storm the galaxy had never seen before. That was the first day. The day that humanity did not shout, did not scream, did not protest. They simply began to prepare. And in that preparation, in that quiet, calm, unyielding focus, the galaxy would soon see something it had never expected: the true power of human will. The hours after the incident at the Council Station were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. While other species expected humans to react with anger, complaints, or public protests, Earth remained quiet. There were no speeches, no formal demands, no calls for negotiation. There was only a silence so deep that it seemed to press against the edges of space itself. That silence was not empty. It was alive, heavy with intention and purpose. On every planet, moon, and station, where humans lived, life carried on in the usual way. Children went to school, workers went to factories, and ordinary people went about their daily lives. But beneath the surface of this normalcy, everything had changed. Military and civilian command centers worked together in perfect harmony. Plans were drawn, strategies reviewed, and simulations ran in endless cycles. Every human, from commanders to engineers, knew their role. Every action was calculated, precise, and purposeful. For the galaxy watching, it seemed like nothing was happening. Communications sent by the Council went unanswered. Messages requesting explanations or apologies were ignored. Attempts to reach out to human envoys went into a void. From the outside, it looked like Earth had accepted the so-called accident and moved on. But appearances were deceiving. Humans were preparing something the galaxy could not yet imagine, and their preparation was meticulous. The human approach was not driven by random rage. It was driven by reason, determination, and a deep understanding of justice. In every strategy room, the focus was the same: the safety of humanity and the punishment of those responsible for the death of an innocent life. Commanders discussed logistics and timing, but the real discussion always returned to the principle that had been violated. A child had been killed, and the galaxy had seen it happen without consequence. That could not stand. Meanwhile, the Council, confident in its authority and power, began to underestimate the humans. They assumed that humanity's silence meant submission. They believed that humans would follow the normal rules of diplomacy, file a report, demand a hearing, and eventually accept a small compensation for the loss. Some council members even whispered among themselves, mocking the humans' restraint, saying they were fragile and would break under pressure. But they were wrong. They had forgotten that humans' greatest strength was their ability to act with patience, planning, and unity. On Earth, engineers worked tirelessly in massive orbital factories, assembling ships that were far beyond anything the Council had encountered before. These ships were not just tools of war, they were symbols of human ingenuity and adaptability. Scientists tested weapons and defenses simultaneously, ensuring that every system could operate perfectly under pressure. Every ship was equipped with advanced sensors, stealth technology, and communication jammers designed to prevent the Council from knowing what humanity was planning until it was too late. At the same time, civilians contributed in ways the galaxy could not see. Technicians programmed algorithms, medical teams prepared for emergencies, and logisticians ensured that supply lines could operate at full capacity for months without interruption. Even artists and educators found ways to support the effort, producing morale programs and educational content that kept the population informed, calm, and focused. Humanity's preparation was total, and it extended to every corner of their reach. The human fleet, once hidden, began moving into position. Stealth ships traveled silently between star systems, creating formations that could strike anywhere at any time. Each ship had a mission, and every mission was designed with precision. The humans understood that sheer numbers alone would not win a war. Strategy, timing, and psychological impact were just as important. They needed the Council to realize, before the first shot was fired, that humanity's response was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Across other star systems, species began to notice the subtle signs of preparation. Energy signatures fluctuated near the edge of human-controlled space. Satellites and sensors recorded unusual movements in orbit. Strange, encrypted communications passed between colonies. The whispers started. What were humans doing? But no one could decipher it. Every attempt to understand or predict human action failed. The silence, it turned out, was even more terrifying than any noise could have been. The council, growing increasingly anxious, called emergency meetings. They debated what steps to take. Some suggested trying diplomacy again, offering appeasement or compensation. Others, more aggressive, wanted to preemptively strike human colonies to prevent retaliation. But before any decision could be finalized, intelligence satellites detected something disturbing. The first human fleets had already left their home systems. No announcement, no declaration, no warning, just movement. The council did not know where the fleets were headed or what their intentions were. Speculation ran wild. Some assumed humans were attacking minor outposts to test defenses. Others feared that Earth itself was under threat, imagining retaliation that would devastate human civilization. Yet, throughout all this confusion, humans maintained perfect discipline. They did not attack indiscriminately. They did not broadcast threats. They did not even reveal the full extent of their strength. Instead, they continued their silent march, preparing for a response that was calculated, justified, and inevitable. For humans, the driving force was not revenge. It was justice. Every calculation, every movement, every decision was guided by a simple truth. The galaxy had witnessed the murder of one of their own, and humanity would ensure that such acts would never happen again. A young girl's death became more than a tragedy. It became a rallying point, a symbol of human resolve. Across all human colonies, her image was quietly displayed as a reminder of what was at stake. People who had never met her felt a connection, a responsibility to ensure that justice was done. Inside command centers, leaders spoke not of anger or hate, but of focus and efficiency. "We do this for them," they would say, referring not just to the girl, but to every human life the galaxy might threaten. Plans were revised constantly, simulations repeated, and contingencies prepared. The humans understood that hesitation could lead to failure, and failure was not an option. At the same time, humans reached out in subtle ways to potential allies. Messages were sent, carefully crafted, suggesting that any species that opposed humanity might find themselves facing consequences. These messages were never aggressive. They were simply statements of fact. Humans were letting the galaxy know, quietly but clearly, that they were no longer a passive species to be dismissed or underestimated. As days passed, the tension in space grew. The Council began to realize that they had misjudged humanity. What they had seen as weakness, they now understood as the calm before an unprecedented storm. The human response was not about politics, not about negotiation. It was about ensuring that no innocent life would ever be harmed again. That realization terrified the galaxy because they understood that humans did not act recklessly. When humans acted, they acted with purpose, intelligence, and overwhelming force. Meanwhile, ordinary humans continued their lives. Markets, schools, and workplaces operated normally. Families celebrated small moments together. There was laughter, there was conversation, there was life. And yet, just beneath the surface, preparation continued. Every citizen, knowingly or unknowingly, was part of a larger effort. Every action contributed to the safety and strength of humanity. In this way, humans demonstrated a unique combination of patience and determination, of normalcy and readiness that few species could ever comprehend. The first signs of human movement toward retaliation were subtle but deliberate. Scout ships appeared in strategic locations, gathering data. Communication networks were jammed to prevent eavesdropping. Strategic points were reinforced, and supply lines were extended across multiple star systems. These movements were precise, coordinated, and invisible to anyone who was not looking carefully. By the end of the week, the galaxy had only one certainty. Humanity was no longer silent by accident. Their calm was a warning, their inaction a prelude. Every species began to wonder what would happen when humans finally decided to act. Some hoped it would be a peaceful resolution. Others, those with power and ambition, feared the answer. And humans, quietly observing all of this, remained patient, focused, and ready. The young girl's death had started something far greater than anyone could have imagined. It had awakened a determination that would shape the galaxy for decades to come. And although the Council did not yet understand it, they were standing on the edge of a reckoning that they had brought upon themselves. Humans were ready. The galaxy, for all its intelligence, technology, and experience, was not. And in that quiet calm, as Earth and its colonies prepared for what was coming, the first true signs of human determination began to appear. Fleets moved into position. Sensors tracked enemy movements, and every system was checked and rechecked. The galaxy had watched humans grow over centuries, but it had never seen them like this, united, focused, and unstoppable. The silence, as terrifying as it was, spoke louder than any message, any warning, or any threat could. Humans were coming, not with anger, but with justice. And when that justice arrived, the galaxy would never forget it. The first signs of movement were subtle. From orbit, sensors barely registered the tiny blips of human scout ships moving through the darkness of space. The Council assumed these were routine exercises, perhaps minor training maneuvers. They did not realize that humanity had already begun its plan, a plan that had been growing in silence since the day the girl had been killed. On Earth, the mood was calm, but tense. In command centers, humans worked in silence, communicating through secure channels that no one outside their network could reach. Every detail was checked and double-checked. Coordinates were confirmed, systems were tested, and contingencies were mapped. Humans were not moving blindly. They were moving with precision, understanding that every decision carried consequences that would echo across the galaxy. The first fleet movement was like a shadow passing over the stars. Hundreds of ships, each with a specific purpose, moved in formation. Some were reconnaissance vessels, small and fast, designed to gather intelligence without being detected. Others were larger, heavily armored carriers, loaded with supplies and defensive systems. And then there were the main warships, massive and imposing, their hulls gleaming as they passed through space. The fleet was a combination of speed, power, and strategy, a reflection of humanity itself, resourceful, determined, and intelligent. Meanwhile, the Council remained unaware of the scale of what was happening. They assumed that if humans were angry, they would act with emotion, striking impulsively and recklessly. They believed humans were still a young species, one that had yet to understand the complexities of galactic power. But they had forgotten the human capacity for patience. Humans could wait, plan, and act with a focus that few could match. This was not rage. This was purpose. As the fleet moved, intelligence reports began to reach the Council. Initially, they were confused. Reports contradicted one another. Sensors picked up strange patterns, and none of the readings matched what anyone had expected. Council officers tried to interpret the signals, but human strategy was unlike anything they had encountered. Humans did not attack randomly. They did not send fleets in predictable patterns. Every movement had a reason, and every reason was designed to maximize efficiency and minimize mistakes. From the human perspective, every action had a purpose. Reconnaissance ships scanned Council outposts, mapping defenses and identifying weak points. Supply vessels carried resources and provisions to key positions in preparation for operations that would come later. And the warships, the giants of the fleet, maintained positions that allowed them to strike at multiple targets simultaneously when the time was right. Humans were patient, knowing that the right moment would arrive and that their actions would have maximum impact. Across the galaxy, other species began to notice changes. Some saw unusual movements near human-controlled space and grew curious. Others, remembering past encounters with humans, began to feel a quiet unease. Humans had always been unpredictable, capable of responding in ways that no one could anticipate. And now, with the death of the girl fresh in their memory, humans were no longer just unpredictable. They were deliberate, precise, and ready. The Council attempted to respond. They sent out fleets, hoping to intercept human vessels and gather intelligence. But every effort failed. Humans had anticipated these moves, using stealth technology, decoys, and advanced sensors to stay one step ahead. Each time the Council thought they had tracked a ship, it had already changed course. Every attempt to approach human forces was met with careful evasion, leaving the Council frustrated and uncertain dot inside the human command centers. The focus remained on the girl, on the reason for every action. Discussions were not about revenge in a chaotic sense, but about justice. Leaders reminded their teams that the mission was not about anger, but about making the galaxy understand a simple truth. Harm a human, and humanity would act to prevent it from happening again. This focus created a calm, almost serene efficiency. There was no chaos, no panic, just purpose. The first visible action of the fleet came not as an attack, but as a demonstration. Human warships approached a small council outpost on the edge of known space. The outpost had long served as a monitoring station, quietly observing nearby systems. Humans did not fire weapons immediately. Instead, they transmitted a clear message, a simple, undeniable statement. The Council had ignored humanity's warnings, and now humans were showing that they could strike precisely and without hesitation. The outpost did not last long. In a matter of hours, the fleet disabled its defenses and neutralized its systems. The human ships moved with precision, leaving minimal destruction to avoid unnecessary loss of life. The message was clear. Humans could destroy, but they did not act out of cruelty. They acted out of necessity. For anyone watching, it was a warning that combined both fear and respect. Humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. Word spread quickly across the galaxy. Species that had once treated humans as minor players began to reassess their assumptions. Intelligence networks reported on the efficiency of human movements, the precision of their actions, and the calm discipline of their forces. It was unlike anything anyone had expected. The galaxy began to realize that humanity's response would not be like that of any other species. Humans did not act impulsively. They acted strategically. Back at the human homeworld, the calmness continued. Leaders and citizens alike understood the magnitude of their actions. The fleet movements were only the beginning. Every decision made in these early stages set the tone for the campaign that would follow. Humans were preparing not only to defend themselves, but to send a message across the stars. The life of every human mattered, and the galaxy would learn. That lesson, the Council, for the first time, began to show fear. Their previous arrogance, the assumption that humans were fragile or naive, had been shattered. Fleet officers scrambled to adjust strategies, sending reinforcements to areas they believed might be targeted next. But humans were always ahead. Every movement of the Council was anticipated, every response measured, and every countered action accounted for. The tension in space was palpable. For the first time, species across multiple systems realized that humans were a force to be respected. The silence that had followed the girl's death was no longer a calm pause. It was the quiet before a storm that had begun. And while the galaxy speculated, humans remained focused, their attention never straying from the ultimate goal: justice, protection, and the demonstration of human resolve. Within the fleet, training. Exercises continued even as real movements were made. Pilots and commanders practiced maneuvers, ensuring that everyone understood their role in a coordinated effort. Communication was constant, but it was precise, clear, and purposeful. There was no room for error. Humans knew that hesitation could cost lives, and mistakes were not acceptable. By the end of the first week, the galaxy had begun to see the pattern. Humans moved like a single organism, each ship a part of a larger body. Reconnaissance, supply, and war vessels operated in harmony, executing plans with careful timing. Even the most skeptical observers could not deny the efficiency and coordination of human forces. What had started as quiet preparation had now become the first visible signs of action, a demonstration that humans were capable of far more than anyone had believed. And through it all, humans remained calm. There was no shouting, no public declarations of war, no unnecessary displays of power. Every action was measured, every movement purposeful. Humans were showing the galaxy that they could strike, and when they did, they would do so with precision and control. The story of the young girl's death had become the catalyst for something much larger, the demonstration of human strength, patience, and resolve. The Council, despite all their technology and experience, could not predict what would happen next. Every day, new movements, new adjustments, and new deployments left them increasingly unsure. They had underestimated humans, and now they were paying the price. The galaxy watched, awed and fearful, as humanity took its first steps toward a response that no one could have anticipated. And in the shadows of space, as fleets maneuvered, sensors scanned, and communications remained secure, humans reminded the galaxy of a truth that had always been at the core of their species. They may appear small, quiet, or vulnerable, but when their own are harmed, humans act with a focus, intelligence, and power that no one can ignore. The first actions of the fleet were only the beginning, and the galaxy would soon learn that nothing could stop humanity once it decided to act. The first wave of human action was subtle, precise, and terrifying in its efficiency. The Council had watched the movements of the fleets for days, trying to understand their strategy, but humans were always one step ahead. It was as if they had already predicted every move, every calculation, every possible reaction. Then the first broadcast came. It was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Across every network, on every communication channel, a single human commander appeared. There were no threats shouted, no anger displayed, no dramatic speeches. The commander simply spoke, voice calm but firm, and the message was clear. "You took one of ours," the voice said. "We warned you. This is the cost of your actions." The camera then switched to live footage from the fleet. Council outposts that had seemed untouchable moments before were suddenly under human control. Defensive systems were neutralized with precision strikes. Sensors, communication hubs, and weapon systems were disabled before anyone could react. Entire fleets were forced to retreat before a single human ship had engaged directly. The speed and efficiency left the galaxy in shock. Humans did not attack randomly. Every strike was calculated. Every move had a purpose. Civilians and non-combatants were avoided wherever possible. The message was clear. This was not about chaos or destruction. It was about demonstrating control, precision, and the consequences of harming humanity. The death of the young girl had set in motion a response that was deliberate and unstoppable. Council leaders were stunned. They had believed themselves untouchable, confident in centuries of power and influence. But they were discovering, too, late, that humans had learned, adapted, and grown beyond their expectations. Every defense the Council thought was secure was already bypassed or neutralized. Every fleet they sent in response was intercepted or rendered useless. It was not brute force that won for humans. It was intelligence, strategy, and the will to act decisively. Across the galaxy, species watched in fear and awe. For centuries, the Council had been the face of authority, the rulers of the galaxy. Their fleets had been feared, their laws respected, their power unquestioned. But now, in just a matter of hours, the Council's influence was being dismantled by a species that had been underestimated at every step. Humans were showing the universe that their silence had never been weakness. It had been preparation, and now it was manifest in unstoppable action. The human fleet moved like a single organism, each ship anticipating the needs and actions of the others. Reconnaissance vessels fed real-time data to warships. Supply ships ensured that every vessel could operate at full capacity without delay. Command centers coordinated movements across thousands of kilometers, allowing for simultaneous strikes that made it impossible for the Council to respond effectively. Human efficiency was more than just strategy. It was discipline and focus that stretched across the entire species. Even in civilian areas, life continued with a sense of purpose. People understood the stakes and carried on their daily lives with quiet determination, knowing that their contribution, however small, supported the larger mission. Engineers checked equipment, pilots trained, and scientists monitored the progress of the operation. Every human was part of a single, unstoppable force. The first major target was a cluster of Council outposts on a strategic planet. These outposts had been used to monitor human activity for years. They were heavily armed, with defenses that many species considered impenetrable. But humans approached with a combination of stealth, speed, and intelligence that left the Council completely unprepared. Defenses were neutralized before the first shot was fired. Security systems were hacked, sensors were blinded, and communication networks were cut. The Council's officers scrambled to respond, but their attempts were met with silent precision. By the time the human warships arrived, the outposts were already under control. There was no unnecessary destruction, no indiscriminate violence, just an unmistakable demonstration of capability. The broadcast showed the aftermath. Council fleets lay scattered, outposts were neutralized, and human ships hovered in disciplined formation. The galaxy watched in disbelief. Species that had once feared the Council now feared humans. The image of humanity's calm, precise, and unstoppable action spread quickly, and the lesson was clear. Humans would act, and when they did, they would act decisively. The Council tried to regroup, but every move was anticipated. Their fleets, their strategies, their command structures, all were exposed as vulnerable to human planning. For the first time, the Council experienced something they had never expected: uncertainty. They had always controlled the galaxy, dictated terms, and enforced laws. Now they were reacting, scrambling, and watching as their power diminished before their eyes. In the midst of all this, humans maintained focus. The fleet did not attack indiscriminately. They did not seek revenge for revenge's sake. Their actions were always measured, always precise, always with the goal of preventing further harm to their own people. The death of a young girl had sparked a response, but it was a response guided by intelligence, not impulse. The message was clear: harm a human, and humanity will act, not with chaos, but with certainty. Even as the first wave of strikes concluded, the galaxy could see the pattern forming. Humans did not act randomly or recklessly. Every target was selected with care, every strike executed with precision, every movement coordinated across vast distances. It was not brute force that defined humanity. It was intelligence, focus, and the willingness to act decisively when necessary. The psychological impact was immense. Species across the galaxy began to fear the consequences of crossing humanity. The Council, once untouchable, was humbled. Fleets that had been confident in their power now hesitated, wondering what humans might do next. Observers noted the calm, discipline of the human fleet, the precision of their strikes, and the clarity of their purpose. It was unlike anything anyone had seen before. Inside the human command centers, there was no celebration, no triumph. The focus remained on the mission. Leaders reminded their teams that the operation was not over. The goal was not only to punish those responsible, but to ensure that the galaxy understood the consequences of harming humans. Every move was part of a larger strategy, and the human fleet continued to prepare for the next phase, ensuring that every decision was aligned with the ultimate goal. Across human colonies, people watched the broadcast with quiet pride. They understood the significance of what was happening. The young girl's death had ignited a response that was beyond anything the galaxy had anticipated. It was a demonstration of human resolve, discipline, and unity. Every citizen, whether directly involved in the operation or not, felt the impact of these actions. It was a reminder that humanity was not just a species, it was a force to be respected. As the day ended, the first real wave of human retaliation was complete. Outposts had been neutralized, fleets had been scattered, and the Council's power was diminished. The galaxy had witnessed the beginning of a response that was both terrifying and precise. Humanity had shown that they could act, and when they did, they acted with intelligence, discipline, and purpose. The message was clear. Humans would protect their own. Innocent lives mattered. Those who harmed humanity would face consequences, and those consequences would be precise, unavoidable, and effective. The young girl's death had started this chain of events, and the galaxy now understood that humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. In the aftermath, there was a sense of awe and fear. Other species began to reconsider their assumptions, realizing that humans were capable of far more than they had imagined. The Council, once the most powerful organization in the galaxy, had been humbled. Their fleets were scattered, their outposts neutralized, and their authority questioned. And humans, calm and focused, continued to prepare for the next phase, ensuring that the galaxy would never forget the lesson they had learned. Harm a human, and humanity will act with precision, intelligence, and unyielding determination. The galaxy had seen many wars, many conflicts, and many political struggles, but nothing had prepared it for the days that followed Earth's silent march across Council space. Every screen in every star system seemed to show the same image as Council. Fleets retreating, Council stations going dark, and human ships moving forward with calm precision. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't wild. It was controlled, disciplined, and strangely quiet. And that quiet was what scared the galaxy the most. For years, the Council had been seen as the most powerful authority in known space. They dictated rules. They decided punishments. They controlled trade, borders, and even communication networks. But now, in just a short period, they looked fragile. Their leaders, once confident and loud, now spoke in trembling voices whenever they appeared on screen, if they appeared at all. And their fleets, once called the shields of the galaxy, now looked like old relics breaking apart under the pressure of Earth's advancing formations. Across thousands of worlds, people gathered in public squares and inside crowded buildings, watching live broadcasts of what was happening. Some watched with fear, others with curiosity, and a few with quiet hope. Many species had lived under the Council's rules without ever questioning them. But as they watched the Council crumble, some finally asked themselves whether those rules had ever truly kept the galaxy safe or merely kept the Council in control. On one distant world, a group of traders argued over what Earth's next move would be. One of them believed the humans would take over everything, claiming every planet as their own. Another was sure Earth would dismantle the Council completely and rule in their place. But an older trader shook his head and said something simple. Humans don't want thrones. They only want respect. At the time, no one knew if he was right, but his words echoed the feeling many worlds quietly carried. Deep inside Earth's fleet, the atmosphere was calm. There were no celebrations, no loud orders, no chaos. Every person knew exactly what needed to be done, and they followed their duties with focused minds. It wasn't excitement that drove the fleet. It was responsibility. They weren't fighting for new territory or resources. They were fighting for the peace of knowing their children, their families, their people could live without fear. As the human ships advanced, they passed many outposts that didn't fire a single shot. Some council soldiers simply lowered their weapons. Others raised white signals of surrender. A few fled before the humans even arrived, leaving stations empty and silent. And every time, Earth's fleet did the same thing. They secured the area, disabled the council systems, and moved on. They didn't harm anyone who wasn't a threat. They didn't punish those who surrendered. This behavior surprised the galaxy. Many had expected Earth to take revenge on everything associated with the Council. But Earth didn't act out of rage, it acted out of purpose. There was one moment that spread across the galaxy faster than any other. On a planet near the Council's core territory, a group of frightened refugees had gathered near a landing zone, expecting human soldiers to come and take control. Instead, when the first human ship landed, the crew walked out calmly and handed food and medical supplies to the refugees. The broadcast of that moment touched millions. Some viewers even cried, because it was the first time in years they saw a powerful force act with compassion instead of domination. On the other side of the galaxy, several smaller species met secretly to discuss the situation. They had always lived in the shadow of the Council, following orders they didn't always agree with. Now, watching Earth move with such precision and restraint, they wondered if this was their chance to finally stand on their own. For the first time, these species whispered ideas about forming new alliances based on fairness, not fear. And somehow, without even trying, Earth had inspired conversations about peace. Meanwhile, the members of the Council, who still held on to their positions, tried to regain control of the situation. They ordered fleets to regroup. They sent messages asking neutral worlds for support. They even attempted to broadcast statements blaming Earth for unnecessary aggression. But it was too late. The galaxy had watched the Council fail to protect one simple, innocent life. And no amount of speeches could erase what billions had already seen. The Council tried to send a message to Earth requesting negotiations, but Earth didn't answer. Not because they wanted revenge, but because they no longer believed the Council had anything meaningful to say. For too long, the Council had treated humanity with disrespect, ignoring their warnings and mocking their concerns. Now Earth was showing them what real accountability looked like. When Earth's fleet arrived near the Council's capital world, millions watched the broadcast in real time. From orbit, the planet looked peaceful, cities still glowing, ships still flying, people going about their lives. But the Council leaders inside their grand towers were panicked. Their defenses, once considered unbeatable, had already been neutralized from afar. Their fleets had scattered. Their allies were silent. They had nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. Human ships positioned themselves in a ring around the planet, not firing, not moving closer, just watching. That image alone was enough to make the galaxy tremble. A single human broadcast went out, informing the planet that the Council's rule had ended. The people were safe, but the government was no longer recognized. What surprised everyone most was what happened next. Earth didn't send troops to take over. They didn't land war machines. They didn't seize the capital. Instead, they sent a single message: stand down. We are not here to take your world. We are here to make sure no one ever abuses power again. This stunned the Council leaders. They had expected Earth to demand territory, resources, or control. But Earth demanded nothing. Instead, they told the people of the planet to choose new leaders, ones who would serve, not rule through fear. Across the planet, people celebrated quietly. They didn't cheer loudly out of fear of provoking their remaining Council officials. But inside their homes, families held each other, and whispered words of relief. They had been waiting for change for years, and now it was finally possible. Throughout the galaxy, other worlds watched and began rethinking their own futures. Some declared independence from the old council structure. Others announced plans to build new systems of cooperation. News networks shifted their tone, speaking less of war and more of transformation. Slowly, conversation changed from fear of Earth to gratitude for the clarity Earth had brought. But even with all this happening, one question remained in everyone's mind. What would Earth do next? Would they claim leadership of the galaxy? Would they form a new council? Or would they withdraw? While the galaxy wondered, Earth continued moving with calm purpose. They secured the last of the council's core systems, making sure no harmful orders could be sent. They sent humanitarian supplies to worlds that had been ignored by the council. They even opened communication lines for species who wanted to speak freely for the first time. Human behavior confused many. They had expected conquerors and instead saw protectors. They had expected revenge and instead witnessed responsibility. And slowly, fear began to fade. On human ships, the crew worked quietly. They weren't proud of the destruction, but they were proud of what they had defended. And that feeling carried them forward as the fleet prepared for its final message dot by the end of the 5th day. Every planet, every station, and every ship in the galaxy knew one truth. The council was gone, and Earth had reshaped the future. But what came next would decide how the galaxy remembered humanity. The stage was set for the final message, the one that would echo across the stars for generations. When the human fleet finally stopped moving, the entire galaxy felt something strange in the air. It wasn't silence. It was something heavier, something that made every world sit still for a moment. Even planets that had never seen a human. Ships suddenly felt like a storm had passed over them. For days, the galaxy had watched the chaos unfold, watched defenses break, watched the council lose the power it once believed could never be challenged. And now, everything was quiet again. From the far edges of the galaxy to the bright worlds near the center, people wondered the same thing. Was it over? Had Earth said everything it wanted to say? Or was this silence just the space between one wave and the next? No one dared to assume the humans were finished. No one wanted to take that risk. Everyone just waited, almost holding their breath. Human. Fleets remained in formation around the ruins of the old council capital, their ships calm and steady, not firing, not chasing, just floating there like guardians of a message. Everyone was too afraid to misunderstand. These ships looked different from the ones the galaxy was used to seeing. They didn't carry markings. They didn't show symbols. They were built with a sharp purpose, with clean lines and dark armor that made them look like shadows in space. Even without firing, they looked like they could end whatever they pointed at. Inside one of the largest ships sat the command team, watching the broken council world through giant screens. The planet below was damaged, but not destroyed. It wasn't Earth's goal to wipe out life. It was to wipe out arrogance. And that goal had already been reached. The council's government had fallen apart, its power scattered across the galaxy. Ships had surrendered. Outposts had gone silent. Entire fleets had folded the moment human forces arrived. Humanity had made its point without needing to push any further. A message request flashed on the ship's main display. It wasn't from a council leader. They had all either fled, resigned, or were trying to pretend they had nothing to do with the events that led to the tragedy. Instead, it came from hundreds of smaller world species who were not part of the council's ruling elite, but had always lived under its influence. Their message was simple and cautious. They wanted to know what Earth planned to do next. They wanted to know if the galaxy was entering a new era, or if this was just a moment of anger that would soon fade. The human commander didn't answer right away. Earth didn't want more power. It didn't want to replace the Council or rule over others. Humanity had always been clear about one thing: protect its own, respect others, and expect the same in return. It was a rule simple enough for a child to understand, yet a rule the Council had broken in the worst possible way. The commander stood in front of the ship's main broadcast system and waited for the signal that the message was being sent to. All corners of the galaxy. Billions of screens lit up at once, showing the human figure standing calmly, the faint reflection of stars shining behind them. When the commander spoke, the voice was steady and calm. Not angry, not threatening, just clear. The galaxy had heard many speeches in its lifetime, calls for war, calls for peace, promises of unity, declarations of power. But this one carried something different. It carried truth. The message started by addressing what everyone already knew. The Council had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about territory. It wasn't even about power. It was about a single child, a life so small and innocent that hurting her was something no civilization, no matter how powerful, could justify. The commander explained that Earth had waited for the Council to take responsibility, to show remorse, to act like the leaders they claimed to be. But the Council had chosen to hide behind excuses and old habits. Then the commander said the words that would echo across the galaxy for generations. You don't touch humanity. Not one child, not one person, not one life. It wasn't a threat. It was a rule, a boundary, a line carved across the stars. The message continued, explaining how Earth had no wish to rule anyone. They didn't want to build an empire or form a new council. They didn't want more land or resources or more influence. The commander reminded everyone that humanity had built its strength not to dominate, but to protect. Everything Earth had created, the fleets, the shields, the advanced systems, was built because they had learned through history that waiting for someone else to protect you was never enough. The galaxy listened, some with fear, some with respect, and some with relief. Many worlds had lived under the Council's shadow for so long that they had forgotten what fairness felt like. Some even saw hope in the idea that humanity, though powerful, chose restraint over conquest. When the message ended, the commander stepped back, and the screen faded to black across countless worlds. For a moment, it felt like time had stopped again. Then slowly, the galaxy started breathing once more. On the human flagship, the crew began powering down weapons, shifting the fleet into a peaceful formation. The commander gave the order for retreat. Not one ship stayed behind. Not one soldier demanded tribute or control. They simply turned and began the long journey home. And as they left behind a galaxy forever changed. The first reaction came from a small world near the Council's outer territory. They released a statement thanking Earth for showing a kind of strength that wasn't about domination. Other worlds followed. Some thanked humanity for exposing the Council's flaws. Others expressed hope that this would be the beginning of a new age, an age where fairness mattered more than old laws written by old powers. Meanwhile, in the ruins of the old capital, surviving Council members held their first honest meeting in years. Without their power, without their pride, they were forced to look at themselves. And for the first time, they realized that their position had never truly made them strong. They had mistaken fear for respect. They had mistaken control for leadership. And this mistake had cost them everything. Across human space, people watched the fleet return. They didn't cheer for victory. They didn't celebrate destruction. They simply welcomed their people home. Humans weren't proud of what they had done, but they were proud that they had protected their own. For them, that was all that mattered. Parents held their children a little closer that night. Friends talked long into the evening about how fragile peace could be, how easily one reckless act could threaten everything. But they also talked about unity, about how humanity had stood together from the smallest colony to the largest city. That unity had given Earth its strength. Over the next months, the galaxy slowly reshaped itself. Without the Council's heavy hand, smaller worlds formed new groups based on cooperation instead of control. Trade routes opened again. Students from different species exchanged messages filled with curiosity instead of fear. And whenever someone brought up Earth, it was with a strange mix of respect and caution. Not because humans were dangerous, but because the galaxy had finally understood something important. Humans loved deeply, and they fought with that same depth. The memory of that little girl became a symbol not of tragedy, but of change. Many worlds built quiet memorials, not to dwell on sadness, but to remind themselves that every life mattered, no matter how small. Even species that had never met a human child added a simple promise to their teachings. Protect the young, protect the innocent, protect peace. As for Earth, it returned to its normal rhythm, its focus shifting toward rebuilding relationships. Instead of ships, the fleet remained strong, but it became a reminder rather than a weapon. A reminder that power meant nothing unless used wisely. Years later, when historians retold the story, they didn't focus on the destruction, the battles, or the fear. They focused on the message. The galaxy didn't remember Earth for the ships it built or the power it showed. It remembered Earth for the boundary it drew clear, unbreakable, and written not in anger but in love. And that message shaped the galaxy for generations to come.